Hello. If you've been watching the previous episodes, you'll know that this is the barest bones of the mortal remains of a Series 3 long wheelbase Land Rover. If you haven't watched those episodes, this is quite an odd place to start, but that's fine with me. Today I'm going to be cleaning the chassis prior to shot blasting it, and basically the more cleaning I can do without shot blasting the better, because shot blasting is a horrible process. Well, it is when you do it yourself anyway. Today I'm going to be using one of these. This is a needle gun, and this is basically a miniature version of the thing you might see someone digging up the streets with. So these do actually come with chisel points to them, but instead of the chisel point, it's going to be driving about 20 or so of these steel needles, and they go all over the chassis, and they'll take off lumpy paint, crusty paint, rust, lots of corrosion. And first thing about them, they're really good at finding the weak spots, which on an old Land Rover chassis there's bound to be plenty. Now this particular one has seen a rather lot of service, and it's busted, and it in fact died right at the end of doing the chassis on the box, which is now on the Zill. That's the other big project. But thanks to eBay, I found a replacement, so I'm just going to swap the needles from this one to this one, and we'll be back in business. Before I do that, I'll get the chassis ready. I want to start with it upside down, I think. And the chassis should be light enough I can flip it without needing to go and get lifting equipment. What I'm going to attempt to do is to deadlift it and flip it over. The deadlift involves keeping the lower part of the back straight. It's actually quite a safe lift then. You see where the weight's going to be. Yeah, probably about here. Not too bad. I can hear lots of stuff rattling around in there, which is probably not a good sign. Let's do a control descent, I think. There we go. Right then, I'm going to fire up the generator and probably both compressors that I've got, because these needle guns, although it's a small device, uses a lot of air, although of course nowhere near as much air as shot blasting does. When I do shot blasting, yeah, I need a diesel compressor for that, but we'll get to all that in due course. Right, let's get some air on the go. That's the retainer for the when you're using chisels with it. You don't need that. Just a bit of lead. These bolts on here are my own modification. So with these on there I can tighten it up, and then I can lock the bolts into place by tightening the nuts. And even then it'll still have a tendency to undo itself, but with the supplied set screws, yeah, you wouldn't last a couple of minutes before it starts. This bit would just unscrew itself. There we go. The nice thing about this as well is it doesn't chuck up the huge clouds of debris that you get when you're shot blasting. The downside, of course, is it does vibrate like hell because, well, that's what it is. It's a vibrating tool by its nature. There's no getting away from that. The only solution is to obviously wear thick gloves, but only work for short periods. And that's why you don't really see these in industry much anymore, I assume. Not that I work in industry anymore. Right, that's ready. I need some hefty gloves. Yeah, that's the bit that went wrong with that one. That bit there fell out. Okay, some hefty gloves, and I'm going to wear a face mask. I'm not going to wear an air-fed mask, just a normal respirator will be fine. Going to let the air supply catch up, so I'm running both compressors there, and it's still, the pressure's dropping away down to like 60 or so, which is not really enough pressure to make this effective. I'll let it get back up to 100 and then do another stint. I switched over to wearing these sort of heavy rubber gloves. These are waterproof gloves. Sort of rubbery or nitrile surface. I think they absorb the vibrations a bit better. I've done 2 sessions so far with the needle gun, and it's going alright. Before I go any further though, I'm going to wash the chassis again, because obviously the last time I jet washed it, it was the other way up. Before I jet wash it, I'm going to give it a going over with this. This is industrial degreaser. So I've got some, particularly these cross members like here, where it's under the engine, where it's under the gearbox. I've got quite a lot of oily gunge on them, which just clogs up the needles and stops them working properly. It's not the end of the world if you get this stuff on your hands, but it is quite unpleasant. It's like, well, I was going to say it's like super soap, but of course that's exactly what it is. The point is, it's really hard to rinse off your hands once you get them on, especially if you've got soft water like I have here, because it's all rainwater. Obviously should have done that before I started with the needle gun, but it didn't occur to me until I was like halfway through and getting stuck in that goopy stuff on the cross members. Well, that should make life a little bit easier. Right, I'll leave that to dry in the sun, and then I'll do another session with the scaler. So I'll just point out again that this is just a pre-treatment before shot blasting. I could have just avoided the needle gun business altogether and just shot blasted the whole thing. I mean, the needle gun is perfectly adequate for showing up all the areas of corrosion. And again, I've been pleasantly surprised, as all along with this, how good the chassis is. So we'll get into that in a bit, and I'll show you the areas of corrosion and all the bits that I'm going to replace. Before I do that, while it's upside down and I've got good access, I'm going to take out these chassis bushes here. So these are notoriously difficult to extract, but I'm hoping the good luck I had with taking out the steering relay will carry over and these will just come out easily. Fingers crossed. The last time I did this was about 15 years ago on the other Land Rover, and I remember it being an absolute pig of a job, and yeah, I was swinging a big hammer at it. I may have got a bit upset at one point, but I actually split the chassis open and gave myself a load more work to do. This, we've got much better access because I was doing it on a complete vehicle there. This obviously is pretty much a bare chassis and it's upside down. We'll see how we get on. That's weird. That's not what I was expecting. Rubber coloured poly bushes. I've never seen such a thing. Normally poly bushes are a really garish colour, but that's why they were so easy to drill out and remove. Not complaining, that was made life very easy there. But I'll be putting in proper metallastic rubber and metal bushes when they go back. Oh, that was easy peasy. Before I carry on with the needle gunning then, let's have a look at what I found that's going to need replacing. Now I'm going to point out all the problems with the chassis, but I'm going to do my best to not be disparaging about the work that's been done on it. Because Mark did tell me he learned to MIG weld on this chassis, and in fairness, everything that's done, some of it's not pretty, but it's all held together, so it is at least solid. I learned to MIG weld on a Triumph Spitfire, and I very much doubt that that survived, so let's bear that in mind. We'll start then at right at the front here. Now this is where Mark drove into the wall, and yeah, you can tell it's taken a hell of a beating. There's original metal here and here. This is what the chassis is supposed to look like with a seam, and then we disappear into a plate there. There's a bulge on there and another one on the other side. You've got the usual rot you encounter on dumb irons, we can see in there. So I'll have to see what I can do about those. Moving back a bit, and these parts of the chassis are in amazing condition. On the other Land Rover that I did up a couple of years ago, this whole section had to be replaced. It's just like one big strip all the way down there, it just disappeared. So that's certainly good. This cross member is also in fine condition, no problems there. Now these bulkhead outriggers here and here, I'm going to replace. They're corroded a bit at the bottom. This one's not so bad actually, but this one's got some holes in it at the bottom here. But the side panels are very thin. There's been lots of surface rust on those, Now these are ones that Mark said his dad replaced in the late 80s. So they've survived a fair old while. What's quite mad here, and this is one of the issues of having to work on a vehicle when it's largely complete, is the alignment. So this one looks fairly square, but this one is in a different place this way relative to that one, but it's also offset that way. It's not been put on square, which is remarkable. I'm sure there was a good reason, and I'm sure it fitted the bulkhead perfectly, but yes, that will be replaced. Now we're in the middle of the vehicle. Obviously this cross member has got a load of holes in it that appeared when I was had the descaler gun on there. Now that's just a repair. The rest of this looks pretty solid. There's a few bits on the end there. Now these outriggers, again I have to replace. This outrigger here is not too bad, but it's the wrong one. As previously mentioned, this is a bulkhead outrigger. Should be up there. This one is quite knackered. And now we're at the back of the vehicle. Now remember, this is currently upside down, so whoever welded this, they would have been working upside down, if you see what I mean, when the chassis flipped up the other way. So bear that in mind when we come to look at these welds. These outriggers here, I think are okay, they're savable. They'll need tidying up a bit, but they've got life in them yet. This whole area around here, again, it just needs tidying. We've got patches on patches here, which just doesn't look clever. You've got an area of the chassis that collects moisture. Bear in mind, this should be the other way up. This will be a low point of the chassis, and yeah, it's just it accumulated problems. But again, easily sortable. There's some corrosion here and here, which is to be expected because this is where the bump stops were. So that's an area that collects moisture, and it's just rotted through the original seam of the chassis. So nothing terrible. I'll just let in some metal in there, sort that out. And then moving on to the rear cross member here is new. Where it ties into existing chassis, there's a fair bit of tidying up to do. It looks fairly square, but I'm going to cut out various patches and just let in just a single run of metal. So again, a tidying up job really. While the chassis is upside down and I've got good access to, well, all of it, I'm going to cut off the outriggers that I'm going to replace. You can see again the capillary action of incomplete weld seams draws the moisture in. And that's what all that is down there. Right, in a case of exceedingly good timing, I just finished lunch when the delivery man turned up with the new chassis parts to replace the ones that I just chopped off. Unboxing. Now, if you've ever worked on Land Rovers, you'll know that seeing the Britpart logo is not necessarily a good thing. I have to say, in fairness, some of their stuff's absolutely fine. But yeah, some of it's dire. I'll just point out that I'm not sponsored by Britpart or by the suppliers of these parts or by anyone else. I have been offered sponsorship for this project, but I've decided to just go it alone. I just think it's a more honest approach. I suppose if anything, I'm being sponsored by my patrons, which is a nicer way of doing it, I think. Anyway, this looks fine, as does that. That's all fine. So despite the dreaded Britpart logo, yeah, I'd say those parts, no problem at all. I did contemplate making some, but really this is quite a, if you're going to do a one-off, this is quite a complicated shape. The one that's just come off has got nothing about it that's worth saving, really. I mean, even, well, any bit you look at is just pitted and horrible, and the metal is just really thin. I haven't decided about the dumb irons yet, but yeah, we'll get into that. So the Britpart, off the top of my head, the stuff I've had trouble with in the past was the, years ago now, I bought a whole set of brake components, the shoes and the wheel cylinders. Yeah, terrible. More recently I've had the swivel kits for the front axle on the, yeah, I can't remember. I think yeah, it was the Series 2. Absolutely fine. So yeah, there you go. Obviously I don't know how these are dimensionally. I've not really offered them up or measured them or anything like that. But yeah, in terms of materials and workmanship, they're absolutely fine at first glance. Yeah, I'm going to clear this all away, flip this over and do the last bit of work with the needle gun. Been over the whole chassis now, upside down, right way up. I found all the areas of rot that are of concern, well, all the areas of rot, full stop, and I haven't seen anything that's daunting at all. There's nothing that's put me off the keeping this chassis and fixing it up. What would have done that if I'd found, say, the bottom plate of the chassis down here was paper thin down the whole lot, something like that. If there was like endemic rot in there, which I've found on, well, quite a lot of vehicles. Certainly the last Series 3 that I had anything to do with, the chassis was just a complete goner and actually fell apart under the jet wash. So yeah, there was no saving that one. This though, it's fundamentally solid. The treatment that they did to it, the life that it's had, has protected it quite well actually. the original factory paint with some kind of underseal over it and then paint over the top of that. Unconventional, but it's worked. For the most part it's worked well, and looking at it here, the whole of the front half of the chassis, apart from the dumb irons obviously, is pretty good, and even the back half, it's only in patches that it's bad. These bits here where the shock absorbers mount to are quite horrific, but again easily sortable. So all in all, still feeling positive.